Hi friends, I'm Ihor Havryshchak, live on Channel 24 this Monday, July 28th. Joining us is our regular guest, expert and political analyst Abbas Gallyamov. Welcome, Abbas. Hello, Igor. Hello, esteemed audience. It's a pleasure to see you. Thank you for taking the time for our next conversation. Abbas, first of all, I want to ask about Trump's latest ultimatum. Surely no one takes the statements of Donald Trump, the 47th president, seriously anymore, because there were a lot of promises and ultimatums. This time he made a shorter offer. On July 14th, he gave Russia 50 days to agree to a ceasefire. Today in Scotland, during talks with Prime Minister Keir Starmer, he returned to the topic. He said he doesn't want to talk to Putin, that he's sick and tired of Putin doing nothing for a ceasefire in Ukraine, and he's giving 10 to 12 days. And then there will be sanctions and possibly pressure. How do you, Abbas, perceive Trump's latest ultimatums? First of all, Igor, I would say that you can't take Trump's words lightly after he and Israel struck Iran. You could before that, but Iran made the mistake of thinking they could ignore Trump, and it ended up in serious trouble for them. Anyone who writes Trump off as an irresponsible blabbermouth is wrong. Trump loves to talk. His words are often unaccompanied by deeds, but in each case, you can't be sure he's just talking. What if he isn't? The consequences of such an error in judgment are too great, and Iran has proven it. So its threats must be taken seriously. Even if 9 out of 10 threats do not come true, no one would wish to be the target of his attack in a single case, because the resources Trump has at his disposal are extremely large. It's very interesting and important to understand why today and why 10-12 days. I don't rule out that it's an emotional reaction because he went hard on Iran today. Perhaps it was a bad day, one bad news story after another, and he decided to act harshly. But emotionality does not cancel out the risks faced by the parties that run into conflict. The Russian economy is unable to ignore the threats that Trump is voicing. There is an opinion that 100% sanctions are too much, that the market will react with a rise in oil prices, and that this is not in Trump's interests. Such a thesis sounds, but it does not seem convincing enough to me. Trump, you see, has a lot to lose too. The view that he only talks and does nothing is wrong. He's a force to be reckoned with. His approval rating is going down. Gallup released numbers a couple days ago. 37% job approval, minus 10 points in 6 months compared to the start of the president's second term. That's a serious drop. The midterm elections are coming up. I do not remember, Igor, whether we discussed this with you or with any of your colleagues. There was a very important measurement on 8 points, one of which was Ukraine. We didn't, did we? Good. Then briefly, we asked not just about approval of Trump's activities, but on 8 items on the foreign and domestic agenda, including the topic of the Russian-Ukrainian war, which was singled out separately. Ukraine is pulling Trump's approval rating down hard. On the Russia-Ukraine war, his 8-point approval numbers are second from the bottom. In the 4 months from March through July, the drop was more than 10 points. This issue is dragging him down. It's not the most important, but pollsters put it in the top 8, along with the budget, trade wars, and Iran, the top topics on the U.S. political agenda.
наряду с торговыми войнами, наряду с темой Ирана, то есть основные темы политической повестки американской.
Here, on the one hand, oil prices are a factor, but on the other hand, you have to keep your promises. You made a promise to the whole world, everyone is watching you closely, and you are clearly failing. Vladimir Putin is laughing at you, leading you around by the nose. Donald Trump, a self-loving man, is certainly offended by this. The threat of sanctions is absolutely serious. Trump can act decisively. Let's remember not Iran, but how he started trade wars, how he imposed tariffs.
Угроза санкций, она абсолютно серьезная. Трамп может махнуть шашкой. Давайте вспомним хорошо не Иран, а как он эти торговые войны свои начинал, как он вводил эти тарифы.
When he acts decisively, he is tough, and now it looks like he is serious. The European Union has recently imposed tough sanctions on Russia. If American sanctions are added to them, India's position is also important. India's energy minister has said that if secondary sanctions are imposed, the country will stop buying Russian oil. This is a very likely scenario. In Russia, houses are already falling down from dilapidation. Today there was a collapse of emergency housing in Saratov.
Это абсолютно рабочий вариант. Слушайте, в России уже дома просто от старости падают. Вот в Саратове сегодня случилось, просто реально аварийное жилье.
An entire entryway crumbled, not because of the attack, but because of dilapidation. That's the second one this week. People are dying. The houses are in a state of disrepair and need to be repaired. The situation is critical. For 25 years, the authorities have been announcing active investment in rebuilding old infrastructure and creating new ones. However, much of what was promised, judging by what is happening, turned out to be empty words.
Восстановление старой инфраструктуры, создание новой инфраструктуры. Все это, похоже, оказалось, не все, конечно, да, но значительная часть того, о чем они рапортовали 25 лет, судя по происходящему, все это оказалось пшиком.
If a cyber attack can paralyze the nation's premier airline, so much so that no flight can take off, land, or be refueled, it indicates a serious cybersecurity problem. Today, airports are in chaos, as seen in the published videos. It begs the question of how the cyber defense system was created and what exactly was invested in. In the 3 regions bordering Ukraine, fortified barriers were built after the war began, and billions were spent on them.
Из 3 регионов, пограничных с Украиной, где возводились вот эти укрепрубежи после начала войны, да, тоже миллиарды туда были вбуханы.
In all 3 regions, criminal cases have been initiated. Specialized officials, including supervisors of construction projects, and in one case the governor, have been arrested. This points to systemic problems. In this situation, it is clearly reckless to inflict additional damage to one's own economy through sanctions. The authorities are actively promoting the topic of Europe and apparently have indeed planned an operation in the Narva area.
Ну, как бы это вот, ну, просто дурь и блажь. Они там сейчас, знаете, активно, очень активно стали раскручивать тему Европы, да. Похоже, что они действительно все-таки запланировали какую-то операцию там где-нибудь в районе Нарвы, да.
It looks like an unconscious effort to switch to another, more malleable object. It is not necessarily a deliberate diversionary strategy. Perhaps someone is actually planning it rationally. But for many, including Vladimir Putin, it is more of an unconscious attempt to forget about Ukraine and lash out at someone else. The reaction arises, "What do you think you're doing?" And the switch happens.
Ну, забыть про Украину, да, и просто вот накинуться на кого-то другого. А вы что тут себе позволяете, да? И раз и переключился.
Donald Trump may have accelerated the process to apply pressure. He gave 50 days and perhaps seeing how they were quickly winding themselves up, thought that by not waiting until the deadline, they would try to avoid the fateful date. The ultimatum is already expected. Ending the war and giving in to Trump's demands is impossible. It will be perceived as weakness. They are concerned about the reaction of their entourage. Therefore, a scenario in which they turn their attention to Europe is likely.
Они в качестве варианта, чтобы избежать вот этой даты роковой, так сказать, ну, то есть что-то надо делать, да, просто прекратить войну и пойти на требования уступить Трампу, ну, как бы нельзя, да, что пацаны скажут, они же этим озабочены. Вот, поэтому, да, и в этот момент кинутся на Европу.
Radical actions may aim to offset the absence of positive news from the front. References to Narva and NATO's eastern flank suggest a possible shift in focus toward Europe. This is the desire to switch to a more malleable object. Perhaps Donald Trump feels that they have already realized that nothing will work. The next offensive will stall like the previous ones. In this situation, they can direct their efforts in the other direction. Ukraine is not yielding. The 50-day deadline is expiring, and the critical moment is approaching. This sense of the deadlock they have driven themselves into may prompt an emotional decision to launch a so-called liberation campaign in Europe. However, it is unlikely that this will happen in the format of an invasion, as in 2022 in Ukraine. Most likely, there will be a repetition of a scenario similar to the events of 2014 to 2022, presence without official recognition, participation of representatives of special services under the guise of local activists, provocation of resistance and statements about oppression.
Поднимут сопротивление, скажут там, значит, сколько можно, так сказать, нас тут угнетать.
Chechen volunteers like roving formations could appear. The generals are already talking about it, apparently considering such a scenario. Perhaps Donald Trump sensed that something critical could happen within 50 days and decided to be proactive in order to stop the attempts, to stop them firmly so that they would not count on success. They had confidence to the last that Trump would not intervene, would do something formal for the sake of appearances, but would not act decisively, and then they could strike.
Они же могут начать, надеясь, что проканает. Ну, то есть у них до последнего была вера в то, что, Трамп не будет вмешиваться. Трамп так для проформы что-нибудь там такое, да, а так он не будет вмешиваться, и мы там их нахлобучим.
To leave them with no illusions, Donald Trump may have accelerated the process. Igor, I don't know. Honestly, I just learned this news myself. I'm reasoning live now, trying to understand what this could mean. It could be a reaction to emotion or the result of a formed understanding of the situation. It could be a combination of frustration, anger, and the realization that procrastination will lead to deterioration.
И понимание, что если буду затягивать, то дальше хуже будет.
If a new war breaks out and Vladimir Putin attacks Europe, Donald Trump will be in a vulnerable position. He said, I will come in and negotiate everything with Putin. This would never have happened under me. But if the previous war could not be stopped and a new one starts, it will be perceived as a failure. So Trump is seeking to influence and stop the situation. It is unknown how exactly this will develop. It is necessary to observe and analyze what is happening.
И Трамп поэтому пытается как-то вот это дело остановить, на это дело повлиять. Не знаю, Игорь, давайте наблюдать, давайте думать.
Abbas, viewers watch you because you discuss the latest news live and give analysis. That's what people are interested in. I would like to ask you about a statement by Sergei Lavrov, the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry. He noted that even during the Cold War, there were contacts and mutual respect between the USSR and the United States. Now, according to him, the situation has changed. Relations between the US and Russia have become much worse. How do you assess this?
Были какие-то контакты, и, как говорит Лавров, было какое-то взаимное уважение. Сейчас, как вы считаете, совсем не так, все намного хуже в отношениях США и России?
There were different periods during the Cold War, the Cuban crisis, the Red Army's liberation campaigns in Hungary in 1956 and Czechoslovakia, the Suez Crisis, and the Arab-Israeli wars, which strained relations between the United States and the Soviet Union. There were also periods of détente, such as in the 1970s, including the signing of the Helsinki Act.
США и Советского Союза. А были, наоборот, периоды разрядки, как в 70-е годы, да, Хельсинский акт и так далее.
I would not say with certainty that there was more respect then, but Sergei Lavrov stated it unequivocally. I wondered why. The confrontation during the Cold War was different in its essence. It was ideological. It was a clash between two systems, communist and liberal market. The United States represented capitalism. The Soviet Union was building communism.
Принципиально чем отличалось то противостояние от нынешнего? То противостояние было идеологическим. Это было противостояние двух идеологий, коммунистической и либерально-рыночной. Да? США были оплотом капитализма, Советский Союз строил коммунизм.
Even if you don't agree with your opponent's ideology, when you see that a person is acting sincerely because he believes in his beliefs, it inspires respect. Today's Putin's Russia has no ideology. It is not building communism. It is capitalism in a brutal, corrupt form. People commit violence not because they believe in ideas, but to expand their sphere of influence and maintain power. This is the main motivation.
Это люди, которые убивают не потому, что они во что-то верят, да, а потому что просто пытаются расширить зону своего влияния, там, да, пытаются сохранить власть в стране, это очень важная часть их мотивации.
They need power in order to convert it into money. The motivation is primitive and cynical. Why respect people like Dmitry Medvedev or Vladimir Solovyov, who hysterically threaten destruction on the air, invoking nuclear weapons, using the rhetoric of aggression and war? Behavior on the verge of hysteria, displays of inadequacy, lack of restrained, rational dialogue.
Угрожает, своей ядерной дубинкой, угрожает войной постоянной, да, вот на грани истерики. То есть, неадекватность полная. Нет вот нормального, трезвого, холодного, такого сдержанного диалога.
Yes, endless hysteria. And for what respect? Sergei Lavrov in this case made me think about a topic that I probably wouldn't have written about myself, Igor. The history of the Cold War is complex, and there were different periods in it. But let's assume that Lavrov didn't lie. It sounds strange, of course, but let's assume it. To be honest, I was surprised by Lavrov's speech today. There was a much more sensational idea.
Знаете, если честно, меня вообще вот это его сегодняшнее выступление удивило. Там прозвучала же гораздо более сенсационная мысль.
Sergei Lavrov openly declared, Russia has no allies, Russia is alone. This was a serious blow to social optimism inside the country. Russians fear isolation, realizing that they cannot stand alone against the entire world. Therefore, the Kremlin invests considerable resources in imitating international support, organizing a Russian-African Congress, conducting diplomatic visits, and organizing summits with the BRICS countries, such as the one in Kazan.
Казани, там, помните, саммиты ШОС, БРИКС там организуют.
Russia spends considerable resources bribing Vladimir Putin's supporters in Europe and around the world to create the illusion of international support. The population is led to believe that the country is not isolated but has allies. Propaganda claims that Russia is supposedly the leader of the global anti-colonial struggle. Maria Zakharova stated during the Russia-Africa Forum that on the steppes of Ukraine, Russia is allegedly fighting for the liberation of Africa.
Глобальной антиколониальной борьбы. Помню, Захарова даже в какой-то момент раздухарилась и сказала, что когда вот этот российско-африканский форум был, она там сказала, что на полях Украины, в степях Украины мы сейчас бьемся за освобождение Африки.
To the surprise of the African participants, their reaction was obvious. The Taliban anthem was reported in the news. Friendship with the Taliban is misunderstood, given that their reputation and worldview is repulsive to most Russians. Nevertheless, Russian authorities maintain contact with them in an effort to show numerical support. The goal is to create the impression that Russia is not in isolation. All flags are coming to visit us, and the number of allies should turn into quality. Each of them individually does not look presentable. North Korea, the Taliban, a number of African states with dubious reputations. All of this does not inspire respect, but together it creates the illusion of international support. For many years, a feeling has been building up that Russia is at the head of the progressive part of humanity, the majority that is fighting global colonialism and the decaying West. And suddenly Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov declares, Russia is alone. It has no allies. Sergei Lavrov is actually hitting all the old rhetoric. It is hard to say whether this is due to an internal protest or whether he himself felt that the system had gone too far and was beginning to resist. Perhaps he realized that he was about to be forced into retirement. Rumors about his possible departure have been circulating for a long time, and he really can no longer cope with the previous workload. Therefore, there may be a personal motive in his actions, resentment against the system. Sergei Lavrov has either dared to speak the truth or is oriented towards hardline representatives, those who are purposefully going for aggravation. They are working on the full mobilization of the country. In this case, his statement is not an emotion, but a deliberate step to destroy the discourse built by the Kremlin through conventional systemic liberals who claim that Russia has many allies. In reality, it is about preparations for general mobilization and nationalization of the economy, with the attitude everything for the front, everything for victory. Not a limited special military operation, but an all-out war. Perhaps this is why Sergei Lavrov promotes the thesis that Russia has no allies. The natural conclusion from this for Russians should be an understanding that it is necessary to unite as in the times of the Great Patriotic War. Everything for the front, everything for victory. Peaceful affairs should be postponed, no demands should be made. Conventionally, in discussions involving Vladimir Putin, there is an argument about the need to fully nationalize the economy, mobilize resources, and focus everything on the front. Civilian industries are being relegated to the background. Representatives of the government's economic bloc, together with Sergei Kirienko, argue that society will not support mobilization and the country should not be put on a military footing. To neutralize this argument of public opposition, hardliners and representatives of the special services continue to actively shape public opinion.
Чтобы убить этот аргумент, что народ там против, народ не поймет, а вот надо народ мобилизовать. Да, надо понимать, что вот эти ястребы, чекисты, они давно уже борются за общественное мнение.
Work with public opinion is largely carried out not only by the Kremlin, but also by representatives of special services, who have their own agenda. During Vladimir Putin's election campaign, 2 campaigns were running in parallel. It looked like political schizophrenia. The official part of the campaign was absolutely peaceful, which can be seen by revisiting the election videos of those times.
избирательная кампания была абсолютно миролюбивой. Вы просто ролики пересмотрите, те путинские времен избирательной кампании.
During the election campaign, the topic of a special military operation was completely absent. Official videos showed peaceful subjects, such as space achievements. At the same time, Z channels disseminated clips saying, "I am for Vladimir Putin because he said that Odessa is a Russian city and I am from Odessa," or "Kharkiv is a Russian city." Propaganda broadcast the intention to start an all-out war and take over all of Ukraine. This discrepancy between the official and unofficial agenda has been present for a long time. Sergei Lavrov may be part of a growing trend to create an atmosphere of a besieged fortress, suggesting the abandonment of a limited special military operation and the transition to all-out war. Donald Trump may have decided to act tough, sensing that the situation is moving in that direction and needs to be stopped. If this scenario is deployed, its consequences could spiral out of control and lead to all-out war.
Потому и решил наехать, чувствуя, что в эту сторону сдвигается, и надо уже остановить. Потому что если они это раскочегарят, ну, потом уже не остановить будет, да, и реально там до войны дойдет.
Donald Trump, watching from the White House, sees Vladimir Putin not just refusing to compromise, but seeking to increase chaos. In the loneliness that Sergei Lavrov spoke of, chaos becomes a tool. For the Kremlin, pockets of instability, in the Middle East or elsewhere, are profitable. Abbas, thank you very much for the conversation and for taking the time to discuss important processes. Your analysis on Fresh Steps Online is indeed of great interest to the viewers. As a reminder, Abbas Gallyamov, political technologist, was with you. Subscribe, comment, subscribe to the YouTube channel listed in the video description, Abbas Galyamov's YouTube channel, and be sure to share our conversation. Ihor Havryshchak was with you. See you on the air of Channel 24.